It began as a routine descent into darkness, the underwater drone's lights piercing the blackness like searchlights into a tomb. The lake's icy grip exerted silent pressure, and the cold seeped through the metallic shell of the drone as it glided ever downward. The hull of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald loomed ahead, its shattered remains half buried in the silt, twisted and broken. The drone's sensors keyed in on the contours, jagged plating, gaping holes, interior voids open to the murky water. What they saw in that instant was not just a wreck, it was a revelation that would chill every observer. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The ship's bow rose from the lake bed like a ghostly prow, leaning at an unnatural angle into the sediment. The drone hovered, cameras scanning edges of torn metal, the faint echo of underwater acoustics bouncing off steel. The superstructure was largely gone, devoured by decades of corrosion and decay. Parts of cabins and corridors had collapsed inward long ago. Yet in the filamentous wreckage, the drone glimpsed a corridor partially intact, a skeletal outline of what must have been crew quarters or passageways. Doors hung off hinges, frames twisted, and in places the decking had been torn away entirely, revealing a jagged, open maw into darkness. Suddenly the drone turned a corner into the main hold. Here the light revealed a jumbled mess. The taconite pellets the Fitzgerald carried were piled and slumped among girders and beams. In the gloom, the pellets looked like spilled stones covering the bones of the vessel. In the triangular space between bulkheads, shadows swirled, and the drone's sonar registered hollows, long empty spaces where machinery once stood. It probed with its manipulators, brushing aside debris that had collapsed into the hold, nudging loose panels aside. The silence was absolute except for the hum of the propellers and the faint crackle of data streaming upward. Then the drone swung into the stern section. The separation was severe. The bow lay some distance away from the stern, evidence that the ship had broken in two under stress. In the stern, parts of the engine room remained more recognizable, though corroded almost beyond recognition. The outlines of massive engines, pipes, shafts lay engulfed in rust and sea growth. The drone settled near the remains of what was once the central engine block, its lights illuminating valves and gauges frozen in time. To the camera, it looked like the skeleton of a colossal creature, its organs exposed. Exposed wiring curled like strange tendrils. Broken rails and support beams arched across the wreck like vertebrae. Throughout the journey, the drone cataloged every scar, every rupture. It mapped seams where metal had torn, plates peeled back, and hull breached. In some places, the steel was deformed into grotesque curves, contorted in ways that betrayed forces far greater than mere pressure. In others, the fractures looked clean, as though ripped apart by explosive force. The drone's sensors recorded microfractures, thin shears, weld lines split apart. Data streamed upward, stress vectors, angles of separation, thickness of remaining plating, internal pressures. The imagery was chilling. At one point, the drone drifted into a lower corridor, a narrow passageway gaping into darkness on either side. The walls were pocked with rust and erosion. Sections of ceiling had collapsed inwards. Metal ladders lay twisted across bulkheads. There was no sign of life, no artifacts of human presence, no expired traces of personal items. The void swallowed the beam of light, and the drone crept forward into the unknown. In the black, the cameras momentarily caught a shimmer, perhaps a curtain of sediment or the flutter of a fish ghosting over a broken window. It was gone in a blink, swallowed by the dark. In the captain's quarters, or what remained of it, lay evidence of the suddenness of catastrophe. The space was strewn with fragments of instruments, fragments of gauges, parts of furniture collapsed. The drone rotated slowly, its light sweeping across what might have been a desk area, a chart table, now skeletal and encrusted. The control panel frame stood with dials turned askew and wiring hanging like entrails. A port light, its glass long shattered, revealed an opening into the lake above, the edge of its frame still discernible. It looked like a wound in the side. The drone lingered, shining light into corners, sending back images that indicated a final moment of chaos. Drawers torn open, wires fractured, instrumentation splintered. As it traced the hull outward, the drone's cameras picked up subtle clues in momentary reliefs of shape. Perhaps a plate dented inward, suggesting collision with pressure, or a crease that curved unnaturally, hinting at a buckling collapse. At one seam, the drone paused, a narrow fracture running lengthwise through a bulkhead, the edges curled outward. That crack ran like a scar from one end of the hull section to the next, as though the steel had cracked along a seam under enormous strain. The imaging allowed researchers to reconstruct stress paths, the directions in which the hull gave way. At intervals, the drone's sonar pinged across voids, revealing chambers now empty, corridors leading to nowhere, and piles of debris. The accumulation of sediment around the hull accentuated the broken frame, burying parts and exposing others. The drone's navigation system carefully avoided agitation of silt. Any disturbance would shroud the scene in murk. It moved like a cautious explorer in a tomb. As it slipped past a torn hatch, sensors detected subtle chemical residues, traces of lubricants, oils, possibly remnants of fuel or machinery fluids long decayed but still detectable in micro concentrations. Those microtraces confirmed that in that moment of disaster, the compartments had flooded, machinery had been flooded, the ship's internal systems catastrophically compromised. One of the most harrowing sequences came when the drone drifted over the broken keel. Here, the structure was almost completely compromised. The keel was bent, contorted, severed in places, parts buckled upward. The intact curvature had given way, perhaps splitting under torque or pressure. The supports which linked the keel to the hull had snapped, and girders were twisted in chaotic warps. It was almost impossible to imagine how steel once meant for strength lay now in ruin. The drone traced the broken paths, capturing high-resolution images that would later allow 3D modeling of those distortions. How the shape bent, what direction, what magnitude. Another moment arrived when the lights passed over what once had been an access tunnel. The opening was jagged, the framing warped, and through that hole the drone could peer into pitch darkness, toward a chamber whose entrance was no more than a doorway swallowed by rust. It backed out, the camera frame trembling with slight motion, as though sensing danger. The echoes that returned from inside that dark chamber registered a hollow vibration like a cavity in ruins, as if the ship still whispered of its final agony. In the open water just beyond the wreckage, the drone's sensors recorded unexpected readings, microbubbles rising intermittently, perhaps gas escaping from interior pockets. There were slight particulate plumes drifting upward, disturbances signaling that decomposition and chemical reactions still played out in the dark. In one view, a burst of bubbles glinted briefly in the beam of light, then vanished, leaving a trail of faint disturbance in water. Throughout the descent, the drone's AI-assisted imaging system highlighted anomalies. Places where stress fractures didn't follow expected structural lines, where plating had half separated but remained liminally connected, where internal frames had either collapsed outward or inward. These anomalies challenged prior structural models of how the ship might have broken apart. The drone's raw footage and scan data began suggesting a narrative of collapse under complex multidirectional stresses, not simply a single catastrophic fracture or a single moment of failure. As the drone traced out the remains of the midships, it revealed the shearing of bulkheads, the compromise of watertight compartments, the collapse of floors and decks. Sections that had once been separated by watertight doors now lay collapsed into one another. Bulkhead plating peeled apart from their frames. The drone's manipulator arm nudged aside a small collapsed hatch plate, allowing a view into a narrow void that looked like a connecting passage, submerged now for decades, but once a corridor between compartments. It illuminated walls speckled with corrosion, rivets long discolored, seams seamed with microscopic cracks radiating outward. Even at this depth, the magnitude of pressure is unrelenting. The drone's hull creaked vaguely in calibration checks, and its sensors constantly monitored stress. The cameras recorded the faint distortion of water under intense pressure, a reminder that below every beam, every join, the steel fought a slow war against crushing force. The wreck's own decay also fought back. Rust had claimed much, parts had long corroded into flake and powder, and some segments had collapsed entirely. But in that darkness and cold, the drone revealed what remained, a tortured monument of metal and history. At a moment, the drone pivoted to focus on one particular seam, a crack running diagonally across a major bulkhead, and then flicked to a fractured plate on the exterior hull nearby, aligning the two in the camera's frame. It let the two fractures play side by side, highlighting their relative orientations. The imagery invited the viewer to imagine the chain reaction of stress. One crack propagating into another, plates buckling, supports giving way. It was as though the ship had cracked open like a bone under pressure, the fragments shifting, rotating, ripping outwards. During the descent, the drone's lights also caught small artifacts. twisted rails, dislodged frame fragments, pieces of piping, but nothing clearly identifiable as personal, nothing that told stories of the people aboard. The hush of that absence echoed louder than any physical object. For all its path through corridors and holds, the drone revealed no final message, no ultimate artifact of human life. What it revealed was only the brutal finality of structural collapse. It is worth imagining the moment the drone's lights first intersected the remains of the Fitzgerald. A quiet confrontation with a ship swallowed by time, hidden in darkness, resurrected by steel and sensor. The effect on the observers above was profound. They watched the raw imagery on screens, live. The twisted, rusted hull, the exposed guts of a ship born into collapse. The way the fractures aligned not in a single plane but in a web. The way rust had eaten so much but left some features sharp and jagged like freshly torn flesh. And the way the ship's bones lay open to the cold. The faint hum of the underwater drone continued, a mechanical heartbeat echoing through the water. Its propellers cut slowly against the dense, liquid darkness, guided now toward regions of the wreck never before explored. Beneath the crushing pressure of the depths, every movement was deliberate, every turn carefully calculated. The last sections of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald lay sprawled across the cold lake bed like the bones of an ancient leviathan, fractured yet monumental, a silent testament to both engineering and tragedy. What awaited further ahead was not just debris, it was revelation carved into rust and shadow. As the drone drifted toward the aft cargo deck, the cameras captured glimpses of peculiar formations, metallic ridges that seemed warped into abstract shapes, almost sculptural. Decades of corrosion had transformed sharp steel into rippled textures, giving the wreck an almost organic appearance. It was as if the lake itself had begun to reclaim the vessel, turning industry into something mineral and strange. The silt that settled on the metal over the years had hardened into layers, creating ghostly reliefs of forgotten structures. Through these textures, patterns emerged, signs of pressure points, directions of collapse, and faint outlines of once functional systems now fossilized in decay. The deeper the drone went, the colder and darker it became. Its floodlights created narrow corridors of visibility through a blackness so thick that it seemed alive. In those beams, fish occasionally appeared, pale, translucent creatures adapted to this perpetual twilight. They darted through holes in the hull, vanished into cavities, their movements barely disturbing the water. The drone's sensors registered their presence only briefly, their heat signatures fading as fast as they came. This haunting stillness lent the wreck an eerie serenity, as though the ship had become part of the living fabric of the lake, host to new forms of life born from loss. Moving closer to the stern, the drone encountered the remnants of the steering mechanism. The great rudder, now dislodged and half-buried, jutted upward like a monument in the gloom. Around it lay a scatter of machinery parts, cables, gears, and the rusted shell of what once controlled the vessel's direction. The engineering marvel that once responded to the helmsman's touch was now an unrecognizable cluster of fragments, its purpose dissolved by time. Yet when the drone's light touched it, the patterns of craftsmanship were still discernible. The precision of welds, the symmetrical arrangement of bolts, the evidence of human care. That juxtaposition of meticulous creation and utter ruin carried a weight that even the cold of the water could not mute. A few meters beyond, the drone's instruments detected a narrow cavity beneath a collapsed section of the deck. It rotated and eased downward, using its robotic arms to shift aside panels of twisted steel. The space opened gradually, a hidden chamber untouched by previous expeditions. Inside lay the shattered remnants of storage compartments, crates crushed and splintered under the weight of falling beams. The fine sediment that had settled here for decades billowed up at the slightest motion, curling in ghostly plumes that clouded the lights. As the drone hovered still, waiting for visibility to return, its sensors picked up traces of organic residue embedded in the silt, an echo of human presence, microscopic remnants preserved by the cold. The data fed upward, silent proof of life long extinguished. When the haze cleared, the cameras revealed an interior wall covered in strange mineral patterns. Layers of rust and calcium had intertwined over the years, forming lace-like growths that hung from the surface like curtains. Within those mineral veils, the faint imprint of a handrail was still visible. The railing itself had corroded away, but its shape endured, a ghost outline preserved in the rust. It was a haunting symbol of the human touch that once moved through these corridors. For those watching above, It was an unspoken reminder that this was not merely metal and sediment. It was a place where footsteps once echoed, where commands were shouted, where human life had filled the void now swallowed by silence. The drone turned and began to ascend toward the broken midsection, where the two halves of the ship had once joined. Here, the destruction was most profound. The edges of the torn hull looked as though they had been ripped by giant hands. The metal curled outward and upward in jagged spirals. Beneath those contortions lay a dark crevasse, the split that had separated the vessel forever. The drone moved carefully around the perimeter, tracing the geometry of failure. Its cameras captured the symmetry of chaos, the way one side mirrored the other, as if both halves had been torn apart by forces perfectly balanced in destruction. This symmetry, unsettling in its precision, seemed almost deliberate, like the result of an invisible experiment conducted by the storm itself. Peering into the crevasse, the drone's sensors detected unstable sediment. It sent a pulse of sonar through the void, and the echo returned delayed, suggesting extreme depth within the split. The space was narrow yet extended far below the visible wreck. For a moment, the cameras recorded faint movements deep inside, shadows shifting against the beam of light. Whether it was falling debris, drifting sediment, or the stirrings of unseen life, the observers could not tell. But it lent the scene an uncanny vitality, as if the ship still breathed in the darkness of its own ruin. Beyond the structural fascination lay another layer, the quiet psychological impact of what was being seen. The more the drone revealed, the more those watching were confronted by the immensity of human fragility. The ship had been designed to endure anything the lake could conjure, a steel titan built with the confidence of industry and progress. Yet the evidence in the footage dismantled that confidence piece by piece. The twisted beams, the splintered bulkheads, the silent machinery, all told a story of power undone in a moment. It was not just a maritime tragedy being documented, it was a confrontation with the limits of control, a humbling reminder of the vastness of forces beyond human reach. As the drone ventured deeper into the lower cargo spaces, its instruments began to register temperature variations. Tiny fluctuations, barely measurable, hinted at chemical reactions still occurring within the rusting hull. Oxygen, trapped in small pockets, reacted with decaying metal, producing faint heat signatures invisible to the eye. These readings revealed the ship as not entirely dead but slowly transforming, a living organism of decay. The process of oxidation, relentless and unceasing, was rewriting the very substance of the Fitzgerald, converting steel to dust grain by grain. Each reaction was microscopic, yet in aggregate, it was reshaping history into sediment. It is a strange paradox that such desolation could also possess beauty. The drone's floodlights revealed surfaces encrusted with layers of rust and mineral, glowing with dull orange and green hues under the artificial illumination. The ship, once a symbol of power and commerce, now resembled an underwater cathedral. Pillars of broken beams stood like columns, arches of bent steel curved overhead, and the stillness of the water lent the scene a sacred hush. Even the fish moving through the corridors seemed like silent acolytes passing through the relics of a fallen temple. What was once machinery now evoked reverence. Further exploration led to the remnants of the radio room. The structure was partially collapsed, but the drone managed to slip through a bent doorway. Inside, the equipment was unrecognizable. Banks of corroded boxes, dials eaten away, wires reduced to filaments. Yet the layout of the space was unmistakable. This was where voices once carried through the storm, where desperate transmissions might have echoed into static before silence claimed them. The drone's camera lingered on the scene, and for a fleeting moment, viewers could almost imagine the faint ghost of sound, a transmission looping eternally through the abyss. The instruments, though lifeless, seemed to hum in memory of what they once were. The psychological weight of the expedition deepened with every meter. The realization that human ambition, embodied in thousands of tons of steel, could be so completely undone by wind and waves struck with primal force. The Fitzgerald had been built as an expression of mastery over nature, yet here it lay, humbled beyond recognition. This confrontation with impermanence was terrifying not because of violence, but because of inevitability. Nature had no malice. It simply erased, transformed, reclaimed. The drone's lights, bright and technological, seemed feeble against that truth. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, What do you think the underwater drone will find near the Edmund Fitzgerald? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.